All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Kiah Morton, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. It is 6 o'clock. We just want to give a couple more minutes for folks to come in. We have folks coming in. We see them coming in. Just a couple more minutes, but we're being very respectful of your time in the evening. So we're going to move forward in just a couple minutes. Come on in, everybody.
It's like the doors of the church are open.
I know, right? Come on in. Come on down. Come on down. Come on down. This is when we need some music.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, I'm not the singer here, so
I had a little speaker going in the background. Yes. We can go ahead and start. Maybe.
All right, let's go for it.
Since we're recording, and folks will so those of you on the call will have access to this recorded, and then those who have registered will also have access to it recorded. So I am going to go ahead and kick it off at 6:02. I'm going to introduce myself again, Kiah Morton, and I am your moderator for tonight. Just a little background about me as we wait for people to come in more and more. I have been involved in cannabis law advocacy in Virginia for over 5 years. I often speak on panels, moderate panels in Virginia and across the country about cannabis laws and cannabis hot topics. I also sit on the board of Virginia NORML for about 5 years as well. So I am well ingrained in the cannabis world, and even still, I did not know about these laws with the guns. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because it's something that everyone needs to be aware of. I also am the CEO and co-founder of Lot Green. And Lot Green are smell-proof stash boxes that have a built-in combination lock on them to give peace of mind as people store and travel in their cars with cannabis. Our company is all about protecting yourself, protecting your stash away from children or pets, protecting your products, whatever is in that stash box. And we're also about safety. So when it comes to talking about topics like this and other topics around cannabis, it's all about education to us, and it's very important for folks to be educated so that they can make informed decisions. So this topic falls into that very well. We need to know more about this, and I'm so glad that we have Kiah Miller here to share more about the laws and answer our questions as well. We got a lot of questions submitted, so we're going to cover those as well. So our agenda. Kiah has a short presentation that's going to hit on the laws. It's going to hit on a recent case that was in the headlines, which really spurred this whole conversation about a woman, a mother, who recently got federal charges because she was a gun owner and also a cannabis consumer. So we'll talk about that, and Kiah will go through those laws, and then we'll go over the questions that we received in and get some answers from Kiah. So you may hear your question answered in that time frame. If you have a question or did not get a chance to submit a question, please go to the chat, and in the chat, select chat to the organizers only so that we can easily find your comment and be able to answer it when that time comes. We hope to be able to get to those questions because we have a lot, but if so, please send them to us in the chat and we'll be sure to check those out during our time. Okay. Also, last comment before I turn it over to Kiah, I do have a discount code that I will be sharing at the end for those of you who are attending that will save 15% off of a Lot Green purchase if you choose to get one. I definitely try to do that when I do speaking engagements as a thank you to everyone who took their time to listen in and learn more. So stay tuned to the end for that. Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Kiah at this time, who you all came to see. So Kiah, please take it away.
They came to see both of us, Sarah. Don't do that. So thank you for agreeing to moderate this. Like Sarah said, we were just randomly having a conversation around recent events, and we said, hey, like we should do this a little bit more formally. And so here we are. I am like Sarah. I'm the bad guy here. I'm the attorney that's going to tell you what you can and can't do. But what I will say is that I am not your attorney. So there is no attorney-client privilege that attaches to anything I'm saying. We're not trying to give any specific advice. Really, our biggest thing that we want for everyone to take away is education. We want you to make informed decisions. We want you to make the best decisions. We want you to know who to go to if you have questions. But I'm not anyone's attorney right now. I'm an attorney. I am licensed in Virginia. I am inactively licensed in Maryland, so I can't even really give you Maryland advice. I am licensed to practice in the federal courts in Virginia as well. But again, I'm not your attorney. So if everyone bears with me for one moment, I'm going to briefly share my screen. We'll do a quick presentation, and then we will basically open it up for discussion and questions. So as we are going through things and you think of them, like Sarah mentioned, please go ahead, drop your questions in the chat, direct them to us so that we can be sure to see them. And with that, let me do a little maneuvering and do this, do this, do this. And Sarah, can you tell me what you see as I am doing this?
Yes, I see your PowerPoint. Okay, and you have to change the display settings.
There we go. All right.
And I only see myself for some reason, so maybe I think you took yourself off. Feel free to take me off.
Okay. Did that fix it or no?
I still see me, but you know what I'm going to do, you guys? I'm just going to turn my camera off, and we'll focus on the PowerPoint, and then we'll come back in.
Okay. I'm hoping everyone can see this. If for some reason you cannot see this, please send us a message in the chat, because we did try this previously and it did work, but you know, in real time, anything could happen. So
right now I see the whole PowerPoint, so you're good to go right now.
Amen. All right, let's do it. So everyone knows what they're here for. Thank you again. And again, we still have people coming in, so thank you for joining us. We've gone over our introductions and who we are. Hopefully you all have had an opportunity to review our brief bios. Those were, I believe, distributed as part of the flyers. If you saw our flyer advertising this event, you've already seen this. So we're not going to reiterate that. I'm going to say it one more time. I'm not your attorney. I am not your attorney. We are not giving out legal advice, okay? We just want to make sure that we are getting the right education out there. If you do want me to be your attorney, contact information will be at the end, so you will absolutely have a chance to reach out. All right, let's get into it. So everyone has kind of heard about how there's been a wave across the country over the last however many years. We've really seen a push to legalize the use of cannabis for medical purposes. So as of April of this year, there are 38 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia that all authorize adult medical use. And sometimes there are situations where children are authorized to use it as well under adult supervision. And for recreational use, as we like to call it, as of June 1st this year, there are 23 states, 2 territories, and the District of Columbia, once again, who have enacted measures that regulate non-medical adult cannabis use. So in Virginia, we like to think of that as the decriminalization of the personal possession of certain amounts of marijuana. Where that conflicts, of course, with the Second Amendment. So everyone has heard of your Second Amendment right to bear arms. This is what your Second Amendment actually says. I don't know if anyone recalls high school civics classes and exactly what our United States Constitution says, but I figured it would be good to throw the language in here so that everyone has a reminder. So if you live in a state where it's legal to either recreationally or medicinally use cannabis, i.e. if you live in Virginia, and you also have this federal constitutional right to bear arms, we have a problem. We have statistics though. A lot of us as Americans own firearms. This is not, I believe, any sort of big secret. The national average gun ownership rate is 39.8%. In Virginia, we have a rate that's 38 amongst the 50 states. We do come in at 35.3% for every 1,000 persons who live here. Some of the highest states who are above that 50% mark, that's Montana, Idaho, Alaska, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Alabama. I didn't include a few others, but there are some very high states. And just one of our neighbors, being West Virginia, they're at 60%. As you can see, they're almost at 61. So we have a very high gun ownership rate in this country. That should not come as a surprise to anyone who's attending this, but that is the fact. Let's talk a little bit about the timeline that we have in front of us. So one of the things I actually did not realize was how long Virginia has actually authorized the medical use of cannabis. So we've gone back to 1979 for the authorization of cannabis for medical purposes here. So if you were caught with any amount of cannabis on you, and you in fact had a valid prescription or certification from a medical provider, that could be used as an exception that would hopefully prevent you from being found guilty for having that amount of cannabis on you. In 2011, and this is really where we start seeing a change in how things were treated nationally. So in 2011, in September 2011, the Bureau ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, they issued guidance. They had been receiving a number of questions from people across the country who were selling firearms. So your firearms dealers, they were sending in questions saying, hey, ATF, we have people, because there have been medical cannabis patients across the country, and they were trying to also purchase firearms. They didn't know what to do because they didn't know if they should deny these people the firearm purchase. They didn't know what should happen. So ATF issued this letter back in September 2011 saying, hey, listen, we understand and appreciate that there may be this medical authorization, but it's still illegal federally, and you are still going to deny people the ability to purchase a firearm. And they also updated the firearm form that you complete when you purchase a firearm at that point in time. We'll talk about that form in a second. July 2021, continuing on the timeline, we talk about when Virginia established the Cannabis Control Authority, and then they also decriminalized the personal possession of marijuana for adult use here in the Commonwealth. In July 2022, so last year, Virginia removed the requirement that you also register for what we colloquially think of as a cannabis card, a medical card. Now you just need that certification, and then you can go to your local dispensary to purchase. You no longer need the certification or that card. That was an annual registration requirement that in an effort, it produced a list, and a lot of people I think were concerned about that, and that's why there was a large legislative push to try to remove that annual certification. It was also costly, or it can be costly for those who perhaps face some other challenges. And so that requirement is no longer in place. Fast forward to today, we have Ms. Taylor's case out of Newport News, and she recently pleaded guilty to federal charges, which is what we will be discussing. The main federal law at issue is, of course, the Gun Control Act of 1968. So where I referenced that Second Amendment constitutional right earlier to bear arms, the Gun Control Act says, hey, we know that you all have a constitutional right, but there are still going to be some exceptions to anyone and everyone just having a firearm here in the United States. And one of those exceptions is the individuals who have been deemed to be unlawful users of or addicted to any controlled substance. Those individuals are going to be banned from possessing or prohibited from possessing or purchasing a firearm. Part of the difficulty here is that cannabis is, of course, still classified as a Schedule I controlled substance. That ATF letter that I talked about, I believe the last slide, that was their official response. And that, again, that letter was put out in 2011. I have highlighted something that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but this is, of course, a point for advocacy. This is a letter that was put out 12 years ago. A number of states have changed in the past 12 years. A number of laws have changed in the past 12 years. We have even more medical use of cannabis across the states. You saw that earlier slide where I believe it's 38 states out of 50. So we're past the point where a majority of this country has now authorized it for medical use. So the ATF needs to look at revising their position. Our next slide, if everyone can see it, I know it's not necessarily the best quality, but I wanted to get the ATF letter in here so that everyone can see. This is what was issued back in 2011. This is what says, you know, hey, federal firearms dealers and any firearms dealer, you are to deny if someone answers that they are in fact a user of marijuana. So this is that letter. This is the point of advocacy, okay? Just keep that in the back of your minds as you are speaking with your legislators and your elected officials. If you have ever purchased a firearm, you have seen this form. This form is part of the reason why Ms. Taylor was charged in the federal court in Virginia. So the question that's at issue is question number 21, subsection G, which is, are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance? Then it gives the warning. The use or possession of marijuana remains unlawful under federal law, regardless of whether it has been legalized or decriminalized for medicinal or recreational purposes in the state where you reside. So Ms. Taylor had checked no on this particular question, and that was later discovered, and she was charged, and she has subsequently pled guilty. I will also point out that this particular question also prohibits people who may have certain pain medications, other controlled substances. So things like opioids, hydrocodone, some ADHD medications, so things like Ritalin and Adderall, all of those things are controlled substances. And so technically, if you are a prescribed user of those substances, the ATF wants you to check no on this particular question, and then you cannot purchase or possess a firearm. One other thing, I'm just sorry, I know I went ahead and I came back. Want to just briefly mention that we can go down a completely different rabbit hole, and we could probably talk for hours about when this particular form is not required. So that's going to be situations where you have a private firearms transaction. So that could be person to person. If Sarah decides to sell me a firearm. Now, there are some states that have enacted universal background check provisions. Virginia is one of those states. Not following the code section that governs our universal background check is a class 1 misdemeanor in Virginia, which means you could be jailed up to 12 months. Our universal background check law is still relatively recent. I believe it was first enacted in 2020. And it has been amended recently as well, but it's still new. And so I'm saying that to say each state is going to handle that private transaction issue differently, and not every state has a universal background check. But the big takeaway here is private transactions are going to be governed by state law, and there are going to be times, of course, when this ATF form is not required. And those are usually going to be those times, those private transactions. Okay, so Ms. Taylor's case. This is a tragedy that I don't think any of us could quite wrap our heads around. It's the unfortunate situation that Ms. Taylor's son, who was 6 years old, did take the firearm, took it to his school, and shot his teacher. Thankfully, she is still alive. And so it became, because of the age of her son, this was very much covered by the news. It's been very closely watched. There was a huge, normally when we talk about school shootings or any sort of mass shooting, we talk about a situation where the shooter themselves would be charged. due to his age being 6 years old, we are not in a position where he could be charged. So then there became a position of, okay, well, let's look at the household. In looking at the household, search warrants, of course, were conducted. And unfortunately, marijuana was found. And Ms. Taylor was charged federally with being an unlawful user of a controlled substance in possession of a firearm, and also with making a false statement during the purchase of the firearm. So what does that actually mean? The false statement charge relates to that ATF form where she had checked no on the box. And being an unlawful user of a controlled substance essentially means that she uses marijuana and she also possesses a firearm. That is the government's case in this particular situation. The burden of proof is still beyond a reasonable doubt, because that is always going to be the criminal burden of proof as it relates to guilt or innocence. However, the bar is still relatively low because of the federal guidance from agencies such as the ATF and from the Department of Justice as it relates to the inferences that the judges are allowed to draw when it comes to proving that someone is guilty of that particular charge. Ms. Taylor also has state charges. So those are charges brought by the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. Those are local charges. You may think of your Commonwealth's attorney as a DA or a state's attorney. Here in Virginia, we call them Commonwealth's attorneys. I am a former prosecutor, a former Commonwealth's attorney, so I've seen some of these charges, and she has been charged with felony child abuse or neglect for having left her child with a loaded firearm. She has also been, and that's a class 6 misdemeanor or class 6 felony, which means that she faces up to 5 years on that charge. And she also is charged with a misdemeanor of leaving a loaded firearm and endangering a child who's under the age of 14. That's a class 1 misdemeanor, also up to 12 months. On her federal charges, those are a potential sentence of up to 15 years. A big question that always comes up when we talk about anything related to cannabis prosecution, we always, as prosecutors, you always hear the term prosecutorial discretion get thrown around a lot. And that is one of the things that was great about being a prosecutor. You have the opportunity to decide what you are going to move forward on. If a case is not, if you decide that a case, it's not worth it, quote unquote, to prosecute someone, then you don't have to. That is the joy of prosecutorial discretion. And so one of the big things around decriminalizing cannabis possession, it was always the over-criminalization, the over-policing of Black and Brown communities. A lot of statistics, a lot of studies, a lot of research was done to look into those numbers. And that has led us to where we are right now with a lot of the policy changes. And so we have a situation where in 2013, under the Obama administration, the Department of Justice announced that they were going to defer to individual states when it came to challenging cannabis legalization laws. Basically, at that point in time, the federal government said, we're going to take a step back. States, we understand that you guys have been enacting these medical cannabis authorizations. We're going to let you guys do what you do. We know it's still illegal federally, but we're not going to touch it. Had a new election, got a new attorney general. So in 2018, the new AG, Mr. Sessions, did essentially reverse that. And he said, listen, the laws are on the books, and I'm going to have my people enforce those laws. I understand that we are currently in a different administration. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not mean to go forward. Even though we have a different administration, we still have a situation where things are being prosecuted selectively. And so there is some research that's been done around how many people have been prosecuted. We don't have exact numbers, but the Marijuana Policy Project, who they're one of the main policy organizations around cannabis legalization and decriminalization, they indicated that in fiscal year of 2021, 56% of approximately 7,500 people who were charged with the same code section as Ms. Taylor, those people were Black. That information was gathered from the United States Sentencing Commission. So if anybody wants to take a deep dive, feel free to go to the United States Sentencing Commission's website and you can dig into those statistics as well. This also underscores the importance of elections. The elections are going to set the tone, and that's part of why we've ended up where we are right now. There have been some recent trends across the country. West Virginia had a representative who recently introduced a bill that would allow medical cannabis patients to legally purchase and possess firearms. Mississippi built that into their medical cannabis law. And there's also been some legal challenges. So in Oklahoma, in federal court, a federal judge recently ruled that the federal law that prohibits people who use cannabis from owning firearms is in fact unconstitutional and a violation of their Second Amendment rights. All of this, again, very recent, and it's still not at a point where we're seeing it in every single state. And I think personally, my opinion is that until we start seeing it really in every single state that has authorized either the medical use or the recreational use, we're not going to get a good change in the federal law. So what's the summary here? I want everyone to really continue working with organizations such as NORML, such as the Marijuana Policy Project. There's a ton of organizations who are all doing amazing work around cannabis legalization, decriminalization, expungement laws. It's another big area. Also want to really remind everyone, and it sounds as corny as it is, but elections really do matter, and at every single level. If you don't get your local board wrapped around the concept that they're not going to provide more funding to your police officers for for arresting people and charging people with marijuana possession, that trickles up, right? So you start with the local level of the funding, you go to your statewide elected officials so that they can start looking at making statewide changes. You look at your federal elected officials, so your senators and your congressmen, and they can be the ones who are working on the federal policy. And if you individually have any further questions, that is literally why attorneys exist. We are here to try to help you. We can help you. Hopefully you never get charged, but we can help you before you even get close to that point. We can try to help you with whatever it is you're trying to do. So please, please reach out. Thank you. That is my presentation. I am going to end this portion and turn us
Okay. Oh, that was great information. Yeah. Thank you for making it digestible, because attorneys can sometimes attorney.
Yeah, that's why everybody loves this.
So yes, thank you for making that easy to understand. So before we go into the question and answers, I do want to say somewhat of a disclaimer, like, we aren't here to tell you to do one thing or the other. Our goal here is to educate and provide the information so that you can make informed decisions. And I just feel the need to reiterate that. So, we don't have any agenda besides educating. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, for those of you who weren't on it, a week ago, I didn't even know this information. So when I saw this case that Kiah just mentioned, and I saw these charges, and I'm saying, wait, you're telling me that legally cannabis consumers cannot own a gun? Are you kidding me? That's how all of this came about. So I had to learn myself, picked up the phone and called Kiah, and that's how we're here today. Okay, so I posted about it on my Lot Green Instagram page, and so many people responded, got so much interaction, so many questions. And many of those questions we're getting ready to ask now. Some of those came via the post, some of those came via DMs, some of those came via your emails to us about this webinar. So thank you so much for the interaction. But it's really, really good questions to be answered. So with that being said, Ms. Kiah, realistically, how often are cases like this happening? Like, is it a major issue or something? or are these charges something that typically happen only when the federal government is trying to dig in and get more charges on someone? How often do these cases happen?
So I would love if the Marijuana Policy Project or anyone just truly would dig into this particular issue, because I can only answer it from the what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
I had never seen anyone be charged with this on the federal side until this case.
Mm-hmm.
The closest thing I've seen is on the state level, where Virginia does have a, I call it the drugs and guns statute. If you have
Mm-hmm.
certain drugs and you also have a firearm on hand, you can be charged. But I had never seen it. And so there's the conspiracy debate of, did they do this because of the nature of the underlying? Did they do this because they felt like the state charges were not sufficient of a punishment?
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate, but it's one of those. I think, unfortunately, some researcher with a lot of time is going to have to dig into the stats, because I'd really love the answer as well.
Gotcha. So, I guess that's good news in a way, that we're not seeing these cases every day. And you're not seeing them. In your role, you would have seen them. I mean, you've been in Hampton Roads, you've been in Northern Virginia, you've been several places. But I think it's still scary because it can happen.
It can.
It may not happen often, but it can happen.
Exactly.
Do you know from those that you may have seen just from doing your research, what kind of sentences people like this are facing? Because you mentioned that she faces, I think, 10 years just on the federal side, if I recall correctly. That's what she faces. And, people who are charged with these would be facing similar sentences. Do they often get those sentences? Do you know? I know you may not know.
Again, don't know. And here's why I say, so she technically, the main code section that she was charged under is up to 15 years. And that's basically, it's a 10-year start and it's a 15-year enhancement based upon whatever may be on your criminal history. Now, my understanding is that she and her attorneys have been working with the federal prosecutors, and there is going to be some sort of negotiation as to what her ultimate sentence would be. As it relates to actual sentences and guidelines, there's an entire process. Sentencing guidelines are a formula. You put in certain things and a number spits out. The Sentencing Commission will have those ultimate statistics. And so that just goes back to whatever researcher who has the time and the grant funding to dig into that. I'd love to see what the statistics actually show, particularly when it's broken down by race and locality. Because the underlying piece to all of this, with the federal government and with federal prosecutors and with their federal investigators, they're going to choose to allocate resources where they feel it's most appropriate. So they're allocating resources in areas where it's a high gang area, it's a high crime area. I have to assume that they're not really doing this in places like Montana, where you have some of the highest gun ownership, but probably not too much of the other crimes that they have deemed are worthy of their time and attention. I think Ms. Taylor falls into the unfortunate category of having been in the Newport News Hampton area, which is unfortunately a very high crime, high target area just due to the nature of offenses that occur there. And so we've got people on heightened alert.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. So the next question, what if I answer no on the ATF form that you mentioned, that you showed us, and then later become a cannabis patient? Does the federal government then expect for me to return my weapons and ammunition?
Yes. But here's the crazy part, right? There's nothing that tells you that. There's nothing that says, oh, you now need to turn in your firearms. Like when we handle protective orders in domestic violence cases, unfortunately, people who are convicted of a domestic violence charge, so that's in Virginia, that's a domestic assault. It could also be strangulation, depending upon the nature of the relationship. But the point is, if you're convicted, the judge tells you from the bench, or a good defense attorney tells you, a prosecutor may even mention it, you are now banned from having any firearms. If you are subject to a protective order, you are required to turn in all of your firearms immediately. Like it's on the paperwork. The sheriffs come to your door and they come looking for it. We don't do that for cannabis. We just wait until people get themselves caught up, and now here we are. And so this goes back to our earlier thing of this is the education piece that I think a lot of people just completely don't get.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. So this question came up a lot. These comments came up a lot. This is the HIPAA privacy protections, and that has to do with your private health information. Prevent the federal government from accessing medical patient registries across the states.
Absolutely.
So a medical cannabis patient, I got a lot of comments like, well, HIPAA protects, they should be able to get that information. But your answer to that is no. HIPAA does not protect medical cannabis patients and the registries.
So HIPAA is great. It does not apply to law enforcement agencies at all. At all. Period. So they can see it, they can access it. Remember how I said when you first started, they were requiring patients to register with the Board of Pharmacy each year, that annual registration requirement that went away last year. That was a lot of people's concern, was that, I'm paying $50 to go onto this registry, and now there's just this like ultra compiled list that I have now paid to be on that's that much easier for an agency to figure out, hey, this person has this. And so that was one of the concerns behind trying to remove that requirement. But at the end of the day, HIPAA does not protect you. It is, or at least not in this situation, not from law enforcement agencies. Law enforcement agencies, to put it bluntly, they're one of the exceptions built into HIPAA. They can do what they want in this situation.
Interesting. All right. So you covered this before. I'm just going to mention it because it was a question asked. Is the ATF form required for all gun purchases across the country? And you mentioned that there are some state-by-state cases, such as a private sale or a person-to-person, or even maybe if someone passes away, passing down. Certain situations may apply in certain states. Correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll move on to the next one. Will someone with a cannabis card be able to renew their concealed carry permit? If the medical card expires, will they be able to purchase a firearm after the expiration?
Okay.
It's like coming from both sides.
It is. So let's do
the first one. Will someone with a cannabis card be able to renew their concealed carry permit?
So technically no. I have not looked at the CHP renewal in a while, but I believe there is not a question that addresses whether or not you are using cannabis. Here's where this gets interesting. It's sort of like the honor system that applies when you first get your cannabis authorization, and you're just magically supposed to know to turn over your firearms. When you go to renew your concealed handgun permit, you're supposed to magically know that you are not supposed to be renewing it. Now, here's and this is solely for Virginia, because I know that we have people who registered from across the country, but I will say this. Concealed handgun permits in Virginia also cover other concealed things. So like if you have a concealed knife or a concealed, the knuckle thing, the
brass knuckles, I think that's what it's called. Brass knuckles.
So like those are considered a weapon. if you have those concealed on your person, those still can fall under that category. But a firearm, no.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting. And so I would imagine the same type of they don't ask applies to the second part of that question, which was if the medical card expires, will they be able to purchase a firearm after the expiration? Same
So
type of.
I'm going to say
Okay.
yes, but I'm going to give a caveat. I saw in one of the things that the federal prosecutors can take into consideration is the recency of any medical marijuana use that you have had. So say like right now, your medical authorization has expired, and in July you go, you buy your gun, and you do things with your firearm, right? You do illegal things with your firearm. And so now you're on the radar of federal prosecutors. They can look into your records and say, oh, well, just a month ago, her cannabis card expired. And so we're going to draw an inference that she is probably still a cannabis user. That is something that the case law has allowed them to do. So that is a little problematic.
Yeah. It's also cloudy.
It is. It is.
Thank you for that context. It definitely helps. So the next question. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I have a FOID card. Will I be able to work in a dispensary as a cannabis nurse consultant? Also, would I be able to work as a consultant, as a cannabis nurse consultant, and purchase a firearm?
So, to the person who submitted this question, and I presume you know who you are because it did come through the emails, and I can reply to your email separately as well. You should definitely check with an Illinois attorney because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing about Illinois law. What I will tell you broadly, you cannot have the cannabis and the firearm. You can't do both simultaneously. My understanding, federally, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what job you may hold, there are no exceptions that would authorize you to have all of those things together at the same time.
Gotcha. This is a good one. Are there any additional recommendations for current medical card holders trying to navigate wanting to own a firearm for protection? And are there any additional considerations for those who have more risk, like licensed healthcare workers, those in government adjacent jobs, etc.?
No. And until we change the federal law to perhaps build in some exceptions for people, no, can't do it. I mean, what I can tell people is firearms, the traditional handgun, long gun, rifle, assault rifle, those are what's banned. What you are not prohibited from possessing, a can of mace, a knife, other forms of personal protection, but you can't have a firearm.
Gotcha. I want to kind of piggyback off of this on another question that both of us heard about having a spouse. So say I'm a cannabis consumer, but my spouse is not. Can my spouse own a gun, even if I can't legally?
Legally, yes, as long as your spouse is not, because your spouse legally can check yes on that box that they are not a user. As long as they're not, or no, I'm sorry, they can check no. That's how the question is written. So they can legally check no. That is legally correct. Now, where things get interesting is, say there is a situation where the firearm, say you all as a couple, for some reason, under somebody's investigation, there is a thing called constructive possession. So constructive possession means it's not necessarily like my cell phone is here. It's not, I'm holding it, but like it's not in my pocket. It's not tucked in. It's not in a purse. If my cell phone was on the other side of my home, and I'm the only person in here. I'm the only person who has access to it. I know it's there, things like that. That's constructive possession. So if your spouse has it and you know your spouse has it, legally, can your spouse own it? Yes. But could there be a constructive possession case made against you? Potentially. Now, all of that is if, of course, you are somehow on the radar of an investigating agency, which hopefully no one ever is, but that is how that could all come together.
Gotcha. Stay out the radar.
Yeah.
Stay out the radar. Okay, so this question is not directly related, but I want to throw this out there in case other people feel this way or have the same question. Do Virginians have a right to not be exposed to marijuana smoke? It comes into my car from other cars. It comes into my home from neighbors smoking near our windows. Do we have the right to not be exposed to marijuana smoke?
No. No. I mean, you could try it. I know that literally within the last like 2 or 3 days, I saw a news release about a case in DC where neighbors had sued each other for, hey, you've been smoking for years. I've been inhaling it. I don't want to inhale it, whatever. And that particular judge did rule in the neighbor, the receiving smoke neighbor ruled in their favor. That was DC. I don't know if that's going to be appealed. Don't know if that's going to, be able to stand, but that's where DC is right now. Virginia, on the other hand, who knows? But right now there are no protections. It's unfortunate, but there are no protections.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll do a little curveball in the questions.
Okay.
Now, we have probably time for maybe 1, maybe 2 more questions. If there are questions in the chat, I can't tell that for some reason. Do you see if there are any chat questions?
I see a question. Looks like I need to clarify RE firearm transaction record. So if you have a prescription for medical marijuana or pain medications, i.e. opiates, you cannot purchase a firearm. Question: what are you supposed to check on the form if you have a prescription? You can't do it. I think the difficulty, of course, like say you got your tooth pulled on Monday and you got 7 days worth of hydrocodone. I'd maybe wait a month or 2, put some space in between it. But if you are the polar opposite and you are a permanent opiate user or opiate, you've been prescribed, because I know I used to have cases where I had clients who were on permanent pain medication due to a spinal injury. I'd say you have to check, yes, that you are a user of an opiate, and that's that on that particular issue. So let's see, there was one other question that came in. So if you answer yes, you will not be able to purchase a firearm. That's correct. You have to present your ID when going to a dispensary in Illinois, even if you do not buy anything from the dispensary. Would visiting preclude gun ownership? I think it depends on how they're processing your ID when you come in. I know that sometimes they're just checking for your age. But what I would suggest to you is, as long as they're just doing a check and not a scan and copy, and somehow keeping a record, I think that that's more clear. But still, you can't have the cannabis and go get the firearm. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay. There's another question in here, looks like, under the previous administration, Herring wanted to enact specific provisions to protect Virginia cannabis users. how does the current AG's position differ, especially since they claim to be more in favor of Second Amendment rights? I will say this. This is a Virginia-specific question for those who don't know who the hearing is, but I have not seen out of our current administration, out of Governor Youngkin. I would. Our current Attorney General is also a former prosecutor, and a very conservative-leaning one. But I have not seen anything around any changes to cannabis policy from our current administration. So we're just going to hopefully leave it the way it is. I know that there were some bills that were introduced in the last legislative session to try to roll back some of the advances that have been made over the last few years as it relates to decriminalization of cannabis possession. But outside of that, there has not been anything else. So hopefully that answered that question. I believe that's all the questions in the chat. Let me double check. Oh, one person said, all I can say is my mind is blown. Us too. Okay. And
Me too.
yeah.
Before this call, during, and after. Yes, I'm with you on that. Whoever said that.
Yes.
Yeah. And last question. I'm going to throw this out. You and I talked about this, but I wanted to throw it out for others who have similar thoughts. I've talked to others about this as well. When states are legalizing cannabis, they are literally bucking the federal system, right? Federal says it's illegal. And the states are saying, we understand what y'all are saying, but we're going to make it legal here. First medically, then recreationally, that you can grow, all these different things. So how come the states can't buck the federal law in regards to gun ownership? Why can't they have the same approach that they had to the federal law about cannabis with this ATF form? And I know states have tried to have efforts to do certain things. I know Maryland recently had some attempts, and you mentioned some other states. There've been attempts, but why can't they just do it?
So I'm going to nerd out for a second. And this is when we were talking earlier. The real issue here is interstate commerce. When you talk about firearms, they're normally going to be produced in one state, shipped across the country, sold in another state, maybe resold in a third state. So there's a whole lot of interstate commerce involved. Whenever you have interstate commerce involved, the federal system is going to be involved. And that is the difficulty. With the marijuana growth and sale, things like that, Kiah's opinion, I have not seen this officially anywhere, but my opinion is that because cannabis is able to be grown in Fairfax, Virginia, sold in Fairfax, Virginia, used in Fairfax, Virginia, it never enters interstate commerce, the states can regulate it. We're not at a point with firearm manufacture and sale as we are with the cannabis. And so the federal government still has to get involved with the firearm sale. Now, that's like one part of it, right? But then the second part of it, say we do have a firearm that is homegrown, home sold, right? That Fairfax born and raised firearm.
Yeah.
Until the ATF decides that they are not going to require this form anymore, it's still, and if it's sold at a firearm retailer, that form is still going to be required. And so it's still a situation where, going back to that 2011 ATF letter, until ATF decides to change their position, we've got a world of problems. So the states can say, we're going to let people grow it, use it, but the federal government is still going to say, we're going to keep an eye on it because we don't necessarily like it.
Mind blown again. I was trying to get an angle, but it didn't work. I was trying.
Yeah.
All right, so everybody, we're gonna close it out now. But if anything, I hope this motivated us all to really get involved in these laws, really pay attention to our elections, like Pia mentioned, and see what can be done with this. This is a long game. This is not something that's going to change overnight. So thank you all for your time. If you have any questions, please reach out to Pia. She's going to put her contact information up on the screen as well as mine. I did promise I want to give everybody a 15% off code to go to Lock Green, www.lock-green.com, or visit our Instagram page at Lock Green Products. And if you put in the code FORYOU, FORYOU, as a discount code, you'll get 15% off, which is better than what I have right now on the site. So definitely please take advantage of that. And that goes until Friday, the 16th. So you have 2 days for that. So as you see on the screen, you have contact information for both of us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, say hello. I love connecting with folks, especially in this cannabis community. It's a lot of education out there to be said. And thank you, Pia. Thank you, Pia, for your time tonight and sharing your knowledge with us. So helpful. So helpful. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This was great. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me.
Yes. Got to. Okay. So unless you have something else to say, Pia, we are good to go. Do you have anything else to close out with?
Nothing else. I hope everyone can see our contact information. We really just want everyone to be educated consumers. So please do reach out if you have questions. Do not do it on your own. Federal convictions are not good. We don't like that. State convictions aren't good. We don't want anyone to be convicted. This is why attorneys exist. This is why you want to talk to us. So keep doing effective advocacy. Work with Sarah. She is doing amazing things. And then hopefully work with us and we will try to get everyone taken care of. So thank you to everyone.
All right, everyone. You all have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your families, enjoy your dinner, and we'll connect on the internet somewhere. LinkedIn, email, however it is. Thank you guys. Good night, everybody.
All right, everyone. Take care.